Hi, I'm Caroline Paige. I'm an RAF veteran. I served in the Royal Air Force from 1980 through to November 2014. Initially, I was on fast jets on F4 Phantoms in the air defence role. And then halfway through my career, I switched to trooping helicopters. I'm a trans woman, and I've known about my gender identity from my earliest years, from about the age of 5. I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the army. He was a staff sergeant in the Royal Artillery. And much of my early years I spent on army bases in Germany or Malaysia. And what I discovered very quickly was that army families tend to have, or military families, I should say, tend to have military values. And in those days, being LGBT plus in the military was not accepted, as will become more apparent in my story shortly. So it was no surprise to me then that when I expressed my gender identity confliction, that it didn't go down very well with the family, and therefore I had to hide that for the rest of my young years. I was a little bit lost with that, but I found a way out in as a 13-year-old when my dad retired from the army and we settled in Cheshire, and I got involved with the Air Cadets and I got involved with aeroplanes and a fascination with aircraft. So this gave me the opportunity to do some flying. And by the age of 15, I'd been solo in a glider out of RAF Sealand at Chester and a couple of times. And that gave me a bug for wanting to get a powered license. So I applied for a flying scholarship with the Air Force. No commitment to join the Air Force, but they sponsored me through the course, which was something I never expected to be able to do. But if you don't apply for these things, then you don't know how successful you're going to be. So I did that, and lo and behold, I ended up doing a pilot course down at Cambridge Aero Club and gained a PPL out of it. So this is what gave me the bug to join the military. I wanted to fly, and of course the Air Force was all about flying, so that's why I decided to join the RAF. I was very much aware of the hostility towards being LGBT plus, although I wasn't really familiar with the language at the time, and certainly the word trans didn't feature very much in public domain. But I was aware that if I was to reveal my gender identity, then I would be thrown out of the Air Force. So I had to hide that. And people often ask why, knowing that you're going into a hostile environment for LGBT people, why you join. And it was because I wanted to fly. And it's like anybody, LGBT plus people want to join because they want to serve in the military for whatever reason. So I ended up as a navigator on F4s in the air defence role up at RAF Lucas, did a couple of tours there, and it was an amazing job. It was front line of the air defence of the UK in the Cold War, and we were launched regularly off quick reaction alert to go and intercept Soviet long-range bombers that were always testing our defences. And it was very much a macho environment that I was in. There was no female aircrew allowed in those days, so it was a very macho Top Gun environment. But I was aware of my gender identity, and the only way I could express that was in secrecy, with the fear of being discovered. So fortunately, having an income and a mortgage allowed me to buy my own house, and in the privacy of my own house, I lived my own life away from prying eyes and so on. Always with the fear, though, that somehow I'd leave a clue or I'd get thrown out. So I had a great time on F4s doing this role, but I was always having to hide who I was. And that became harder and harder as time went on because I was in my 20s and there was nobody to turn to because I didn't know who to turn to. There was no support groups in those days. And clearly, if I told somebody and they got the wrong idea and told somebody else, then I was outed and that was the end of my career. And if that was the end of my career, that was the end of my house, my connections with my family and friends, and I'd stood to lose everything. So those were kind of quite really hard days, but I loved doing the job. And I couldn't see a way forward at that time. At the end of the Cold War, the Phantom was going out of service and the Air Force was drastically cutting back on numbers. But they were also asking for fast jet navigators to go take their tactical experience onto trooping helicopters. So I saw that opportunity and I switched to helicopters. initially on the Wessex, doing a couple of short tours in Northern Ireland. And I ended up in Bosnia with a United Nations team, which became a rapid reaction force operational staff, which was trying to bring about the end of the civil war in Bosnia. And I was out there for 7 months, and it gave me time to reflect on my life. And I decided my life was more important. I needed to do something about that. So when I came back, I set in motion a chain of events, which ultimately led to me walking into the medical officer's appointment, and with a big portfolio of medical paperwork from outside specialists in the private sector, and asking from me to be able to transition in service, but to remain in service too. And of course, this was 1999, so by the time this happened, so the law barring service was still in place. But it's important that we remember that that ban was also interpreted to mean trans people, so they were dismissed under the same consequences and the same circumstances as anybody who was gay as well, because nobody really understood what being trans meant still in those days. So there was a huge risk of being thrown out. But fortunately, senior commanders decided they wanted to keep me in service. I was doing really well. I was just about to help introduce. I was posted, the first person posted to Merlin, which is a brand new helicopter coming into service. 24 troop seats in the back, 4 crew. Huge advance in technology, and I was helping to introduce that into service. So it was a really good role. But unfortunately, my life, well, not unfortunately really, but I decided that my life was far more important to me than any role within the military. So they decided to keep me in, which was absolutely fantastic. And we didn't know how to do that. There was an army sergeant major who was transitioning within the army at the same time. She transitioned in January of '99. I was in February of '99. And there was this huge responsibility of becoming the first trans officer to serve in the British Armed Forces. And I knew, especially when I was outed on the front page of national newspapers, where everybody was demanding that I be thrown out because they were saying that there was no room for somebody like me within the military. I'd be a danger to colleagues on operations, and I would be a liability. So I knew I had to stand up and push hard to get back to the front line. I was taken off the front line for a year or so until my transition was complete. So when I first transitioned, it didn't go down very well with my friends. So I lost an awful lot of friends, people who had been very close to me and weren't able to cope with that and didn't understand. I was hearing a lot of voices from within the military that were all negative, all demanding me to leave. And it was a great shame that within that were some friends. And when you only hear those negative voices and you don't hear the positive ones, then you assume that everybody is saying the same thing or thinking the same thing. So I'd made a couple of really good friends who only ever knew me as Caroline within the military, and they were my support group. But slowly, as other friends began to hear more about me, or maybe had time to think about things and to come to some understanding, some of those friends got back in touch, which was really nice. But I still, you can never tell how people will react. So even close family members weren't able to cope with that, and I lost connections with those as well. And that was one of the big worries, that whilst I was serving, who do you tell? Because actually, some of those close friends were the ones that I would have confided in. And as it turned out, their reaction was very negative. So I would have been outed and thrown out. Initially, the hostility that I got from friends came from those friends who were on the Phantom in the fast jet community. And those friendships broke down. And for a long time, when the Phantom went out of service and they created reunions in London, for a long time I didn't go anywhere near the reunions because I didn't want to walk into a room and greeted by hostility, or to be putting people in a position where they didn't know how to react and or interact with me. So so I didn't attend those, which was a great shame, until a few years ago a friend of mine got in touch and said, why don't you come to the reunions? And I said, because I'm not sure you want me there. And he said, well, we talk about you, why don't you come along to the next one and see what happens? And I did, and I walked into the room and I was reunited with some wonderful friends who came up and said hello, and we had a nice chat and a couple of drinks, maybe a few more than a couple of drinks and things like that. And yes, there was still a corner of the room which was kind of muttering and quiet in the corner, and they didn't want to interact with me, which is fine because everybody's entitled to their own opinions and things. But it was just so nice to be able to renew those connections with old friends, and so I will definitely go to another reunion in the future. I would say that now the majority of people are open and supportive because there's more understanding. There was no internet, there was no social media, there was no way of people to sort of reach out and understand that without direct contact with someone. What I found was that direct contact worked. As soon as I came back in touch with friends who had been hostile to me, it gave them the opportunity to go, well, actually, you're just the same person. You laugh at the same bad jokes, and you know, you have the same skill sets and all that kind of stuff. And they were able to adjust and get around that and become really, really supportive and good friends. But I wanted to get back to flying to prove that trans people were just as valid within the military as anybody else. And I did that, and I went back to the Merlin, the helicopter I was trying to help introduce into service, set up the first squadron with that aircraft, rejoined it at the end of 2000, and then fought really hard to become the primary expert on tactics and defensive aids on that aircraft. Fortunately, just in time, because we were soon off to Bosnia initially. So I did a couple of tours out in Bosnia, and then we moved into Iraq, and I was on the first team that took those aircraft into Iraq. 4 tours followed in Iraq before we moved in 2009 to Afghanistan, and I did another 4 tours there. And that showed people that, hey, I was a person with a skill. It didn't matter that I was transgender. I was somebody there who was able to do the job. And my colleagues were asking me to go out on those tours with them because they felt safer with me out there because of the skills and the knowledge that I had. So that was one good thing. But also it showed up to other people that, hey, does it really matter if somebody is themselves and it can bring their whole selves to work, as long as they can do the job? That's a great thing, surely. So the environment started changing, and over a period of time, it grew to be an incredibly positive environment. And I was really proud to be part of that. I started doing advocacy by going around doing talks to help people to understand, because I found that if people listen and understand, then they're more likely to make their own judgment rather than listen to somebody else who's coming out with stereotypical rumor and all that kind of stuff. So having done that, I finished my service on flying duties. I was still flying the Merlin at the end of 2014, and went out into be a veteran into the civilian world. I take that message about diversity inclusion and show them through a positive example that if you give somebody a chance to be themselves, then they can do a really good job and be part of the team, and that's crucial, really. Because if you have a really happy team, then you're gonna succeed in whatever business you do. I had a great time in the military. I was really fortunate in that I was able to serve as myself for the last 16 years of 35 years of service, just being me. And there was an awful lot of people that weren't able to do that. They were caught, they were thrown out, they were outed, they were thrown out, or they were forced out because of the environment. And so I felt it was something that I wanted to do, was to be part of the Fighting with Pride charity team, to reach back and pick up those people and bring them back into the military family, where they've been isolated from that over the past 20, 30, 40 years. And that's what Fighting with Pride is all about.